What's a staunch liberal doing writing about Ronald Reagan?
Well, I've always thought of myself as a political independent. I've never really been comfortable with sort of any party line. And one of the things that bothers me about what we've seen with American history is how it tends to be written by partisans now. For instance, you'll have Ann Coulter writing a defense of Joseph McCarthy, that kind of thing. You have people sort of pushing forward a certain agenda. And my favorite political writer in the United States now is Rick Perlstein, who's written, he's a progressive, but he's written about Barry Goldwater, he's written about Richard Nixon, he's got a book coming out on Ronald Reagan, and he doesn't let anyone off the hook. And I think that's an approach to history that we should see. I thought that the 1976 Texas primary was fascinating because it was a pivot point where we started to see a realignment in American politics, and where we saw Ronald Reagan basically salvage his political career. And that was fascinating to me regardless of what my own political beliefs were, and because it changed the country that I lived in. And I wanted to try to understand it and approach it in a way where, unlike some of the other people who've written about Reagan, was not going in to celebrate him. I was also not going in there to trash him, but to just try to tell the story in the most honest way that I knew how.
Mm-hmm. Aren't you giving too much importance to what happened in those 4 weeks when his actual, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but his big comeback happened in North Carolina?
Well, the thing about Reagan with the 1976 race was North Carolina has been the primary that people have focused on, when they have focused on the 76 race at all. And one of my motivations writing the book was to tell the Texas story because I think it's been sort of overlooked over the years. If you look at the actual story behind North Carolina, that primary has been kind of sold as a big one. It was true that it was his first win after 5 losses, so it was important to him. But if you look at what Reagan and his campaign manager were doing, they planned to continue even if they lost North Carolina. They expected to lose there, and Reagan was already off to the next state to campaign when the North Carolina results were coming in. So he was going to go on regardless. He would have been in dire straits, but he was going to continue. But even if we accept the idea that North Carolina kept his campaign alive, it only kept his campaign alive for a month until the Texas primary. After North Carolina, he conceded the next 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and New York, because he didn't have enough money. So they basically said, we're going to put those 3 states aside, let Ford win those, and we're going to concentrate on Texas. And Texas, it's all riding on Texas. So North Carolina may have kept him going for a month until Texas, but if he had lost Texas, he was done. And that was something that Reagan and his campaign manager had agreed on. So Texas was the one that actually enabled him to go all the way to the convention. Instantly, it became obvious to the Ford people and the Reagan people that this campaign was going to go on for the next 3.5 months to the convention. And by doing that, he built a national following. He was able to make this big speech at the national convention, and it created this platform for 1980. If you the final thing I'll say about North Carolina versus Texas, and not to diminish North Carolina because it was important, if you look at the delegate math, Reagan won 28 delegates in North Carolina to 26 for Ford. He gained 2 delegates on him in that race. And by the time he got to Texas, he was much further behind because, as I said, he conceded the next 3 states. In Texas, he won every district, he won all 100 delegates. So the delegate math shifted dramatically. I mean, he came from way behind to gaining 100 delegates on Ford in 1 day. And so a big motivation for me was to say this is an important story. I think it's the most important primary in Reagan's career, and it's been overlooked.
What role did San Antonio play in all that?
Well, there are a couple of interesting stories about San Antonio. The most infamous one involves Gerald Ford's first campaign stop in Texas. He instantly got to San Antonio, instantly went to the Alamo, and they had a reception there for him. And they had a spread of food, and among the things they had there, they had a plate of tamales. And Ford, so the legend goes, picked up a tamal and didn't know what to do with it and started eating it with the husk on. Lila Cockrell, who was the mayor of San Antonio at that time, her version of the story is a little, maybe not as embarrassing to Ford as some of the other stories that we've heard. Her version of it was that he was about to eat it, somebody saw him doing that and told him not to do that. Most of the media accounts at the time were that Ford actually did bite into it, and it was a really embarrassing thing, and it kind of became like an urban legend type of story.